This is a history of John Wesley Global Methodist Church. John Wesley Methodist Church was formed out of a desire to plant a new church with conservative ideals and obedience to orthodoxy. The church members met in 1989 to form a new congregation, quote, with a traditional focus and worship style, period, end quote. As the UMC began to drift away from traditional standards and orthodoxy, the congregation of John Wesley once again stood up and moved its church into a more theologically consistent and traditional church, the Global Methodist Church. And this is that church's story. Our story began in the 1960s when we were a part of St. Mark's United Methodist Church in Victoria. Sometime in the late 1960s or early 1970s, St. Mark's UMC had intentionally planned to start another Methodist church in the Northcrest area of Victoria. The interested members met in Vickers Elementary School with somewhere around 40 or 50 people present. The discussion lasted about an hour, and the conclusion was that it probably could not be successfully done at that time.
About 10 to 12 years later, another group tried again with approximately 30 people present with a similar discussion, and they even discussed building the church across the street from the Vickers Elementary School. There were about 4 acres across the street from Vickers at that time, and they thought they could use the school parking lot for the overflow parking. Again, the discussion was that it would cost too much, and that there were too few starting members to pay all of the expenses. After Carl Westbrook became pastor of St. Mark's, the church grew in leaps and bounds, and a church-wide discussion took place about a building program at St. Mark's. Slowly at first, and then as time went on, more and more of the old members left. There were few new members to take their place. This pattern followed the general trend of church memberships all across the United States in the 1980s. The decade began with a resurgence in church attendance. However, the Great Decline also began during this period. Church attendance, prayer frequency, and the importance of religion in people's lives declined significantly. By 1984, the church was losing close to 2,000 members a week. For St. Mark's Church, the early services and the late services appear to have developed almost as separate congregations. When the second service recommended that the first service, the early service, be dropped and the church have only one service, Carl promised to pray about it. Conflict within the church came to a head when the switch to a single service happened. When the switch was announced, Pastor Carl was asked why there would no longer be 2 services. He responded that the Lord had told him to put the 2 services together. The events that followed may have left painful and angry feelings among the congregation, but they also led to a revival of spirit, especially for those who are now motivated to plant a new church in the north side of Victoria. Immediately after the service, a few of the early morning service members had a meeting at Jack and Nancy Peary's home. 21 people attended. The idea was discussed that the time was right to call several of those who attended the early service, as well as others who might be interested, and plan on starting another Methodist church, possibly in the general area of Northcrest, or at least on the north side of Victoria. Each person was asked to write a letter to the district superintendent, Dr. Gilbert, to tell him that we needed a new church. At the second group meeting, there were more members in attendance, and the actual planning for a new church began. The first church session to be held 2 weeks later was planned to be held at the Rosewood Funeral Home Chapel. The chapel was provided to the church members rent-free. On January 15, 1989, at 9 o'clock in the morning, 91 people gathered at Rosewood Chapel on Mockingbird Lane. Dr. John Gilbert, Superintendent of the Victoria District of the Southwest Texas Annual Conference of the United Methodist Church, called the people to worship for the purpose of chartering a new congregation of United Methodists on the north side of Victoria, Texas. Charter members submitted suggested names for the new church. Don Herndon was the person who suggested the name John Wesley United Methodist Church, and that is the name that was finally decided on. This was a day of celebration when 112 names were entered as charter members of the new John Wesley United Methodist Church. This new church was the culmination of over 3 months of planning and preparation by these charter members. Most of the new members had been active in St. Mark's United Methodist Church and had responded to the need for a new congregation to serve those in the community who desired a small church with traditional focus and worship style. Others came because they had not previously found a place of worship in Victoria, and a few came from the First United Methodist Church. Since no pastors were available for appointment to the organizing church, Barbara McKnight, a former local pastor and an ordained deacon, was given the part-time charge in October 1988. The first baby baptized in our church was Wesley Condra. The first worship service was held on October 9, 1988 at Rosewood Chapel. That same day, an adult class was also organized with Job Curry serving as the teacher. That day, we had 72 worshipers. They were asked not to give offerings of money because there was no authority to open bank accounts for the new congregation. Instead, they were asked to offer gifts of service by writing on slips of paper what they were able to offer to the new church. Not really surprisingly, in addition to those gifts, the offering baskets still yielded $31.50. Helen Herndon kept this money in a sock under her bed until it could be properly managed. The church received almost $200 before the bank account was opened. The first bank account was opened at South Texas Savings. For several weeks, the singing was a cappella, with words projected on a screen using an overhead projector. The first hymnals were loaned to us by the First Presbyterian Church, and later St. Mark's loaned the church some of their Methodist hymnals. By the beginning of 1989, we had almost $9,000, and the congregation elected to purchase 100 of the new United Methodist hymnals, which had recently been adopted by the General Conference. The hymnals were dedicated on July 9, 1989. Catherine Rouse, organist for Rosewood and a member of the First Presbyterian Church, volunteered to serve as the regular organist for services at John Wesley. The first regular choir director was Dean Heem, with pianist Elise Hearn. When the steering committee met in December 1988 to nominate church leaders, the intent was to develop a minimal structure, but the enthusiastic response of the people allowed a complete slate of administrative council and officials to be elected. The United Methodist Women also organized immediately and planned a full program for the year. Jane Wendt was the first elected president. The Reverend Marie Kaiser became our first full-time pastor for John Wesley Church in June 1989. Congregations in Victoria supported the new church in a variety of ways. The Church of the Nazarene offered their facilities for a chili supper on November 17th. During Lent 1989, the first confirmation class met, and on the day of Pentecost, May 15th, 3 were baptized and 3 were confirmed as full members of the church. The First United Methodist Church let us use their building for socials. We had our first money raiser by cooking for the First United Methodist Church on Wednesday night. Early in 1989, the church confronted the need for an office as well as facilities for church school classes and fellowship gatherings by leasing a portion of a building at 1408 Mockingbird Lane. This building was a former liquor store. We leased the building from Quero Federal Savings, which later changed its name to Quero State Bank, and in 2006 changed its name again to Trust Texas Bank. Volunteers built partitions and chancel furnishings, painted walls, scrubbed floors, cleaned the windows and bathrooms, and arranged the office and other areas. By the fall, we were ready to move in completely. On November 9, 1989, the congregation had its first worship service. We had facilities for Sunday school, fellowship, and worship, as well as our church offices. First United Methodist Church loaned us a communion service set. In June 1991, Richard Strait was appointed to serve John Wesley UMC. In anticipation of building our own facility, we purchased 8 acres of land at the corner of Zac Lentz Pkwy and Millette Drive. The total cost was $225,000. On September 9, 1992, Quero Federal Savings delivered a notice that the Mockingbird location had been sold and that John Wesley had 30 days to move out. We had been considering solutions to crowding and had been looking into property in Victoria Square on John Stockbauer Drive. Necessity spurred us to move to this location, which had approximately twice the space we had on Mockingbird. Our first Sunday in the new location was October 4th, 1992. We celebrated the 4th anniversary of our congregation. 10 children were confirmed and baptized by the Reverend Richard Strait. Our building committee immediately began to push plans for our present facility. Randy Ramsauer, an architect from San Antonio, was hired. Ground was broken on December 28, 1994. The first service was held on October 29, 1995. The membership of the congregation at this time was 241. The first years in our building were eventful. We learned much about the use and misuse of the facility. We became better stewards. We found we were finally able to be a larger part of the Christian community with many services and mission projects while still attending to the needs of our own flock. We implemented 5-year goals and reached most of them. John and Linda Elford accepted an assignment to John Wesley UMC in August of 1997. As a team, they brought many new perspectives to our mission as a church. John's music abilities were truly a gift from God. We celebrated our 10th anniversary in January of 1999. We looked at our church's past, its present, and its future. Peter Michael Aguiar was sent to pastor John Wesley in June 2002. His tenure lasted 3 years. In June of 2005, Reverend David King became the new pastor. With his kind, caring manner and his great sense of humor, the church began a bright and exciting season. On October 3, 2005, John Wesley United Methodist Church was granted certification as a welcoming congregation by the General Commission on Communication. Certification means that the congregation had systematically evaluated its hospitality and intentionally embraced a lifestyle of welcoming newcomers. In order to be certified, the church had to be qualified for at least 100 points on a yearly checklist of welcoming activities. John Wesley United Methodist Church was the 5th certified congregation in the Victoria District. In June of 2012, Pastor Charles Stevens Sr. and his family moved to Victoria, and he took over as pastor. During his tenure, John Wesley United Methodist Church and Telfordshire United Methodist Church joined as a two-charge conference. Pastor Charles spent Sunday mornings with a service at John Wesley, a service at Telfordshire, and then back to John Wesley for a second service. In addition to the Sunday service, Pastor Charles started a praise, worship, and deliverance service on Wednesday evenings. Reverend Ken Green came in to replace Reverend Stevens in 2015. Reverend Green brought a revival to John Wesley in his preaching style and friendly manner. Our declining members began to turn around, and the church grew livelier. Our church was still over $500,000 in debt for the church building. He helped to refocus the church on paying off this debt. His wife was called to serve another church by the United Methodist system, and the two of them moved to serve elsewhere. Reverend Carl E. Westbrook had retired from the ministry by this time. Ken had recruited him to serve as a volunteer choir director. When Ken and his wife left Victoria, Carl came out of retirement and stepped in as a 3/4-time pastor. Under Carl's leadership, we have further reduced the building debt. As of this writing, we have decreased the debt by around $400,000. The membership has continued to grow under Carl's ministerial care. Our church went through a challenging time when the COVID pandemic hit and everyone was on lockdown. Carl fought to keep the church's connection with the membership through a number of innovative ideas. He began by continuing his messages to the congregation even though no one was present. The messages were recorded and published on YouTube, on our web page, and on our Facebook page each Sunday morning. When he got tired of preaching to empty chairs, we invited members to bring in their favorite stuffed animals to sit in their usual places to serve as proxies. Carl instigated a program called Hi, Honk, and Holler, which became an opportunity for our congregation to visit each other through our car windows. Each Thursday we would drive in circles around the church to holler back and forth with each other to maintain our connection. At one point we began to offer a reverse Hi, Honk, and Holler. We would meet after Sunday and then drive out to the homes of those who were unable to attend our weekly Hi, Honk, and Hollers or even to attend church. Carl decided to make better use of the fact that we were isolated and reach out via videos. So he began traveling all over Victoria to present his weekly messages to our congregation and anyone else interested in receiving a weekly spiritual message. Joanne Grady introduced the idea of inviting individual congregants to present weekly uplifts. Many of our congregants took advantage of this idea to present their favorite Bible verses and discuss the meaning of that the verses had for them. These were also recorded and then presented on Wednesday mornings via YouTube, the website, and Facebook. We were all relieved when the lockdowns were lifted and the churches were once again allowed to have in-person services. Nevertheless, we continued to record our Sunday services and post them online on Wednesday mornings for the sake of those who were unable to make it to church on Sunday. Trouble was brewing within the United Methodist Church, and a split between the progressive or liberal members within the church and the traditionalist or conservative members became inevitable. The progressive members sought to make the UMC more socially acceptable and the rules of the church more pliable. The traditional members felt that the overall structure of the UMC had become too top-heavy, that the UMC was no longer holding its members accountable to the discipline, and that the UMC was straying away from Scripture. The UMC struggled to find a means for those member churches which could no longer tolerate the perceived changes in direction that the UMC appeared to be making. The UMC had approved a disaffiliation plan in 2019 with the intention of making a better plan at the 2020 General Conference. However, the COVID-19 pandemic prevented the 2020 General Conference from happening. No further general conferences would be held until 2024. Pastor Carl allowed the membership to discuss whether we wanted to pursue disaffiliation. The church members agreed to investigate disaffiliation and underwent an 18-month discernment process. This 18-month discernment process involved intense prayer, fasting, and thoughtful consideration of what it would mean to leave the United Methodist Church. The church voted for disaffiliation from the United Methodist Church on January 23, 2023. The vote was 44-5 in favor of disaffiliation. Once John Wesley had voted in favor of disaffiliation from the United Methodist Church, we began the discernment process for where our church would go. Did we want to be an independent, or did we want to join another organized church, such as the Free Methodist Church or the Global Methodist Church? At a special called church conference on February 19, 2023, we voted to join the Global Methodist Church once our disaffiliation from the UMC was confirmed. The Rio, Texas Conference affirmed our disaffiliation on May 6, 2023. Part of the requirement for disaffiliation was to remove all signage associated with the United Methodist Church. John Wesley Global Methodist Church members took their vows to the Global Methodist Church on June 25, 2023. We pulled down the old United Methodist crosses and signs and added new signage on our church. Our new signage reflects our membership as a Global Methodist Church. All churches are presented with a constant challenge. If your church disappeared today, would it be missed? We believe that the answer is a definite yes. John Wesley Global Methodist Church's past ministries have been important contributions to the Victoria community. These include feeding the Victoria County Jail incarcerated, participating with the building of new homes through Habitat for Humanity, and our Methodist Men's Ramp building projects. We would be missed today thanks to our ongoing missions of providing support to Victoria Christian Assistance Ministries, or VCAM, Christ's Kitchen, the Salvation Army, the Food Bank, and Bethany Maternity Home. We also currently support our community with our annual crafts show, the annual car show, and by bringing free gospel music concerts to Victoria in the form of the Blackwood Quartet and the Westward Road groups. How will John Wesley Global Methodist Church serve our community in the future? We are awaiting God's Word.